Welcome to the NABS podcast. NABS is the support organisation for those working in advertising, marketing and media. I'm your host, Louise Scody. Each week I'll be chatting with someone from our industry to find out how they support themselves and those around them through challenging times as well as the day-to-day. And it's all to help you support your own mental wellness. I can't wait to start chatting. This week our guest is James Appleby. James Appleby is managing partner at Assembly Global and also chair of NABS flagship pitching training program Fast Forward. James has worked in media agencies for 22 years, running large, complex, and sometimes high-pressure clients across luxury, retail, and government, which includes a lot of pitching work. James has a passion for personal development and team growth, including mindfulness, yoga, coaching, and team building techniques. Learning has been a key theme throughout James' career, which is why being involved with NABS Fast Forward is his favourite thing to do. Well, welcome, James. It's really great to have you on the NABS podcast. How are you?
Great to be here. Yeah, I'm fabulous. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. You have recently started your new role. How is it going with the craziness of a new job and adapting to a new routine?
Yeah, it's good. Thanks. I think in some ways it's the same as anyone starting a new job, and I've done that a few times in my career. And we might come on to this, but having a little bit of time out to consider what I did next, which I did this year, having been made redundant, it was interesting having had the time to reflect on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I've come into it with a really much better energy than I would say I've started some other jobs in the past. So yeah, all in all, I'm in a very good place. Thanks.
Good. I'm happy to hear it. Well, we'll delve a bit more into that in a minute, but just want to reflect. What does mental wellness look like to you?
That's a great question. So I was, yeah, I would say, I would say the short answer is a good night's sleep. I think it's just the best indicator for me of whether I'm happy, whether I'm mentally fit. Um, and I quite often like to think about things. Maybe this is my kind of media planner brain, from an opposite point of view, i.e., I know what it looks like when I'm mentally not feeling great. And it looks like me waking up in the middle of the night and me being quite cross and grumpy with my kids and my family and my wife. And it's me not concentrating on what I'm doing when I'm trying to enjoy myself. Um, and I'm thinking about a project or work or a difficult person that I'm having a difficult conversation with. So the flip side of that is when I'm sleeping well, when I'm laughing and smiling and joking with people, and that doesn't feel like an effort. When I'm actually enjoying a family weekend, like it's my son's birthday on Friday, and we had a great family weekend for him turning 8. And it all felt really good and fun. And then I thought, oh, it's work tomorrow, on Sunday night, as opposed to I hadn't spent the whole weekend thinking, oh God, it's work tomorrow, which sometimes when I'm not in a great place, I have caught myself thinking.
Do you find it's a bit chicken and egg with the sleep factor?
I must admit, cards on the table, I'm very lucky. I'm a very good sleeper.
You are
So
so lucky.
I am so lucky, and I know from talking to a lot of people that that's not the same for everyone. But I'm generally speaking a good sleeper, which is why I think I use it as an indicator, because I mean I could fall asleep in a thunderstorm and kind of on a concrete floor and all that stuff. If I'm waking up in the middle of the night worrying about something, then it's really bad. So I know, again, I'm fortunate it's not happened to me too much in my life, but it has happened a couple of very notable times. And looking back, those were times when I was mentally in a not brilliant place with work. So yeah, so it's a bit chicken and egg, I think, because of course once you start to lose sleep, and I was here sort of a few months ago when I was didn't have a job and not quite sure what to do next, and was worrying about everything every day, worrying about money, worrying about family, worrying about would I ever see the inside of a media agency ever again, all that stuff. And I had like one bad night's sleep, and I thought, that's it, I've lost the ability to sleep. And so of course you just get more tired and more grumpy, and it goes round and round in circles a little bit. But as I say, I'm sort of quite fortunate in that sleep-wise, it's a sort of natural position to be in. But I did have to pull on lots of mental well-being tricks that I have in my cupboard, and I sort of brought them all out to try and get myself back.
Well, let's talk about the contents of that cupboard. How did you?
Yeah,
Because that is a stressful time. You very openly shared that you were made redundant, and it's happened to so many of us, and
yeah,
especially at the moment. And it just shows that wherever you are in your career, unfortunately, you're not immune. So you have the trauma of being made redundant, and then the period where you're not working and you're interviewing and you're worried about money coming in. So, what are you taking out of the cupboard to help you during that genuinely stressful time?
yeah. So I think the from the pandemic, remember that,
Yes.
I learned, and I'm sure I learned similar things to a lot of people. But obviously, we all go on our own journey and learn stuff about ourselves. But the physical fitness bit has been an absolute kind of mainstay. So the good thing about not having an office to be in every day was that I could basically do a run or gym or cycle pretty much every single day, Monday to Friday anyway. And that was like, I considered that like a baseline, because it that physical health really did help my mental health. It helped me just be calmer and sleep better and be sort of more naturally tired. So the physical fitness thing was, I think, a big thing. Um, Talking to people as much as possible. So what I learned during my time of redundancy was that people are incredibly generous and kind, and they certainly were in my case with their time. I and actually, just to go back a step, one thing I found, is that it was a very lonely place to be, because, of course, as soon as you're the only person, well, not the only person, but you're all of a sudden you're the odd one out, and you don't have a place to be and loads of stuff to get done. You realise that people really want to help you, but they've all got jobs and they're all families, and they're all really, really busy. And everyone says, "Oh, we must go out. Let's have a chat. I'll connect you with this person." And they do, but my time scale is like, well, let's do that in the next hour because I haven't got
Yeah.
anything else on. And your time scale is 2 weeks is pretty good, so that was quite frustrating place to be. But also, it was a slightly lonely place to be, because I was physically sitting at home, when I wasn't exercising or going somewhere, trying not to spend money. I was kind of at home thinking, I'm not chatting. And I realized about myself that I need that social contact. I mean, we've all, a lot of us have done some sort of introvert extrovert test, Myers-Briggs or whatever. And I'm probably a bit more up the extrovert scale. And I now definitely know that I am, because I know that if I don't get that social contact every day, I start to feel a bit frustrated and start to climb the walls a little bit. So just making myself, but I also didn't want to be a bother to people. So, like, just making myself talk to people. Again, I realize in my day-to-day job, and then my new job at Assembly, I've realized I get it all the time, and it's wonderful. There's people who've got problems to solve, and we've all got the same problems to solve. So I can just go and chat to people. We sit down and we say, right, what do we need to get to in the next hour? And I come away feeling energized, because that's where I get my energy from. I realize not everyone is the same. But I think knowing that about yourself is a really helpful thing, because then you can go, okay, cool. Well, that means I'm not gonna come home and say, oh, I'm exhausted from talking to people today. I realize actually that's where my energy comes from, because I was much more exhausted not talking to people, if that makes sense.
It does
So,
make sense.
so,
Yeah.
so yeah, I guess the physical side of things from an exercise point of view, the social side. Um, I must also say that something that happened during the pandemic was that I kind of inadvertently started the pandemic not drinking, and I ended up doing that for over a year. I also, and it just, I think it helped. And then I did that again at the start of this year, and again started it when I was in work, and I thought I'd just be good to have a bit of a health kick, and it was great to keep that going. And I found it just really gives me a clearer head. I mean, we all like to have good news about our bad habits, right? But unfortunately, I know the news for me is there is really no good news, other than one day I'm sure I'd like to have another glass of wine again. But that's really helped as well, because sticking to that, knowing that it's helping the sleep, helping the exercise, just all of that's keeping me a little bit more on the straight and narrow has been, I guess, probably the big three.
So it's about identify what's going to make you feel good, and then really making an effort to stick with that, bolster yourself where you can. So my next question is about looking after your mental wellness when you're starting a new role. And it sounds as though the new role is looking after your mental wellness in a way, because you're getting that opportunity to mix with people and socialize and chat with people, which you know does you lots of good. And we know actually from research we've done and so many people we speak to, the social connectivity aspect is just everything. I mean, that is just so important for mental wellness. Is there anything else that you're doing to look after your mental wellness when you're starting the new job? And do you think that your tactics for starting a new role change as you progress up the career ladder? I mean, you're quite high up now. Um, is it a different thing for you as opposed to 20 years ago? Or do you think there are some fundamentals in there that we should all
So
stick to?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'll get the bit out of the way that's probably of no interest to the younger people, which is that it does. I would say it doesn't necessarily get harder. I think it does get a bit more intense, and you just have to be a bit more. I found I need to be a bit more focused about it, not just because maybe you've got more responsibility in the job, maybe not, but also I've found I've got more responsibility in the job now than I had 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So obviously, I kind of think, well, that requires my attention and focus, which I think is a sort of a fair trade. But also, I have my wife and I have two children now, and my wife also has a very busy job, and we don't have any kind of any real magic other than really good. It's really boring to say, but like lots of logistics and planning, right, and all the life admin that anyone who is a parent will know, or a carer. So it just becomes a bit like this is the same plan, but you need to be much kind of tighter in execution, I think, because there's just a lot more going on. So I think, again, prioritization. I've heard a lot of people talking about prioritization this week, just because we're very busy at work and doing lots of great stuff. People say, "Oh yeah, I know you've got lots of priorities," and I had to correct someone and say, "No, you can't have lots of priorities, otherwise they're not really priorities." So for me, pedantic as I am, so for me the priority is family, work, and sleep. That's really, I mean, that really is it. Like, I know that if I'm starting to erode into good quality family time, doing my job well, or sleeping well, then I'm doing something badly, and it will start some kind of vicious cycle that I don't want to be in. So it does mean working out what you deprioritize. So TV, sadly, seeing friends has to be one of them, and hobbies. But I seem to remember kissing goodbye to them when I had children about 13 years ago. So
Your
that's
children are now your hobby.
my children are my hobby. Exactly. Well put. So I think it. I think it in terms of trying to be a bit more useful to everyone for that. I don't know, but I certainly think that there's you probably naturally get a boost of energy going into a new role. I think anyone does. There's a bit of a new lease of life. There's a bit of a fresh start. There's new people. There's new faces. But equally, it can be very easy to say yes to everything at the beginning of a new job and desperately want to impress everyone, and that can lead to a kind of a bit of exhaustion.
Mm.
There's a book which it seems that most people I know have read, called The First 90 Days. I can't even remember who it's by, but with the title like that, everyone kind of just buys it. And I've got a dog-eared copy with some pencil marks in, and it's a perfectly decent book, but it kind of tells you what you probably would have worked out on your own, I think, which is have a plan, try to add value by the time you get to the end of 90 days, rather than just sitting there and passively learning, which I think would hopefully most of us consider fairly kind of common sense. But I think as long as I feel like I'm giving it the energy that I was missing, and that I felt like I really wanted to be involved in when I didn't have a job. I think I'm coming home at the end of the day feeling pretty good about it. But caveat, I'm 2.5 weeks in, so well, let's see in a while.
I'm enjoying the upbeat nature with which you're delivering your message. It's interesting about the 90 days thing, because I think you also have to know about yourself. How long do you generally take to feel comfortable in a role? And once you know that, you then don't add any undue pressure on yourself, because it takes a while to figure out what's what in a new
Yeah,
organization. And for me personally, I think 6 months, I feel bedded in. Before that, I'm still like, well, what on earth? It's not to say I don't get things done. It's not to say I don't identify quick wins, but that level of comfort where your job is like a sofa, you know where your bum grooves are, you know where to sit. I don't get that until at least 6 months.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought actually, because this first 90 days book sort of puts a lot of pressure because you go, well, it must be 90 days then. I mean, as you say, it depends on you, it depends on the role, depends on the company, depends on the job you've been asked to do. I have found in previous roles that they should remain nameless to protect the innocent, but I have, kind of gone in thinking, right, they've said 6 months before you really understand a business. I've thought, well, that's too long. I'm sure I can add value before then, and I've kind of ended up chasing my tail a bit because
Mm,
actually, to an extent, they were right. Um, but then, of course, you want to be useful. So it's a really good one. I mean, it's interesting how, of course, we have probation periods, and that sort of does tend to be 90 days. Most people are on a 3-month probation, aren't they? I
yeah,
think, in my experience anyway. So you'd sort of think the idea is you'd know how well you're doing after that 3-month period. But it's interesting starting a new business and hearing people just who a few people have started at the same time as me saying things like, "Oh yeah, I mean, because obviously the first 3 months, the first 6 months, the first 9 months, people are kind of throwing it out in conversation as if to
yeah,
kind of get some sort of approbation of is that right? Does that seem fair?"
yeah, yeah.
And it's not a formally contracted thing. It's just, when am I meant to know what's going on? Um, and I'm, without wishing to sound really, really twee, but like, I think I've always stayed in businesses as long as I learn something, and as long as it's still interesting and I'm still finding something out. Um, and I think you'll never fully 100%. I mean, I think the day you walk in and go, no, I think I know this like the back of my hand, is probably the day you're bored. And certainly in my case, the day I'm bored, and the time it's time to look at something else. But yeah, it's a very good point about putting pressure on yourself as well. I think, which is that, in my experience, I can only really talk about me because that's all I've got. But um, pressure comes. I am my own worst enemy when it comes to pressure. I think, with maybe one or two exceptions, I put more pressure on me than anyone else around me does. Um, and that's just something to watch out for, because it also means you have the power to give yourself a break sometimes and say, do you know what? I think maybe you have done pretty well, or you've done your best, or you've done everything that could conceivably done, and you've spoken to other people and they seem to agree with that. So maybe give yourself the evening to actually unwind for 90 minutes before you before you go to bed again and do it all again. So I think that mental pressure, we talk about it being a pressured industry, it tends to attract people, I think, who who are self-motivated, and self-motivated people add pressure to themselves. So it's one to watch out for, because it can kind of come up and bite you, I think.
So much about what you've said makes you a great choice to chair Fast Forward. And Fast Forward is NABS training program for rising stars in the industry, where we teach delegates how to pitch. So, how did you get involved with Fast Forward, and what's bringing you back to it for a second year?
Well, if you'll indulge me for about 60 seconds, I'll tell you how I got involved. I had a sabbatical in 2016, and in my month off, I had a bit of reflection time, and I reflected. Cheesy as this is going to sound, my reflection was, I like I like my life, I like my family, I like my job. Things are pretty good. So that was a great reflection to start with. But then I thought, well, I actually would really like to give back a bit to the industry, because I've been in it for 15 years or so, and I'd sort of like to do some kind of mentoring or help or teaching or something, because it's something I enjoy as well. And I sent a couple of emails out, including one to an email address I found for NABS, I think, on somewhere on the website. And I got a call back in about 35 seconds from somebody called Kylie, who said, "Hi, I run a course called Fast Forward. Do you want to be a mentor? Starts tomorrow." And I was like, "Yeah, sure."
Brilliant.
Um, and that was it. I was kind of chucked in at the deep end, because it was week 2 of a course, and I think we were a bit short of mentors back then. And yeah, I absolutely loved it, because it was an opportunity to meet a load of people kind of at my stage in my career, as mentors, but also lots of people learning the ropes of the business. So people in different kinds of agencies, media agencies, ad agencies, and spending a bit of time in a room with them in the days when it was all face to face over a kind of 10-week period was just really uplifting, actually, because it was a chance to help people learn learn a bit of the craft and learn how to pitch and learn how to put a deck together and all the stuff that I'd sort of not realised I knew how to do, and had the ability to pass some of that stuff on. If you'll forgive me sounding grand for just a second, but like it just kind of gave me a real buzz.
What do you think in terms of the challenges in the industry? Do you think Fast Forward helps to address?
Um, Well, it's interesting because it was conceived as a course by Jeremy Bullmore 25 years ago, I think, to bring together media agencies and advertising agencies. And his observation at the time, because media agencies were still relative to now, they were relatively new things, that they were separately appointed by clients and they would go off in different directions. So you'd have the advertising agency going off and doing great ads and media agencies going off and doing great media plans, but they didn't really get each other. They weren't therefore very joined up and they weren't delivering the best for clients. So it was conceived in that regard, and it still largely does that really, really well. Obviously, the world has moved on quite a lot in 25 years. We didn't have social media. We barely had digital media then. Um, and actually, I think one of the things we've become more aware of as an industry, but also a global, I think as a Western population and as a social science, become more aware of stress and what it is, and mental health, and the fact that it's, hopefully that stigma of mental health is starting to kind of become eroded. So I think actually the pressure around our industry, which is a very real thing and is probably always going to be a part of it, is something that NABS Fast Forward, as a part of NABS, is able to really help people with. So I think there's that, because it's as I say, you give people a kind of pressure cooker experience, but it has to be to a degree, because that's what we do as a business. If you get put on a pitch, you don't you don't get to do it at your own pace. There are very real time pressures. You don't get to do it with all the resource in the world, because it's a pitch, and that's just how these things work. But also teaching people how to work together, how to learn um, different skills from around the industry. Ultimately, there is a big thing about learning to listen to other people, which sounds really patronizing, but it's still, every single conversation I have, I tell myself off for not listening slightly more. And of course, there's a lot in there about building a network, and that's part, again, another big mental health thing, which, to bring it back to my earlier point, is really, really helpful when the going gets tough. I've seen people build friendships in NABS, and that would include myself. I've got some really good friends who I've made through NABS Fast Forward. And it's part of what makes it so fun for me, because I keep returning with a group of mentors who are brilliant. Some new each year, but there's some people who've been doing it for a few years now. But those are also the people that I called upon when I needed a bit of help, and said, have you got time for coffee? Be really good to get your advice. And that literally made my day. When a 20-minute coffee that someone has got between two meetings, for them was a 20-minute coffee with someone who's a friend. For me, it was the highlight of my week. And it kept me smiling till the end of the day. So I think there's so much that goes on in Fast Forward, um, that may just seem like another evening course, but actually is about preparing you and your mental health for the future.
It's a really good point about the mental health, and as NABS is delivering it, it's something that's really core to us. And I think what you were saying about, you meet someone and maybe 10 years down the road, they give you a 20-minute coffee and you feel absolutely brilliant as a result. That it's about setting those foundations for relationships that are really going to, I don't want to use the word pay dividends. I'm going to start that again. It's about setting yourself up with relationships that are really going to be enriching and rewarding and mutually helpful as the years roll on.
Yeah,
How
and
does,
just sorry,
sorry,
go on.
no, no,
I was
go
just
on.
going to Okay. I was just going to say, okay, I won't do that bit. Just to add to that, I can't remember what I was going to say now. So I've distracted myself. We were talking about relationships and say of the future. Oh, annoyingly, I know it'll come back in a minute. Anyway,
It will come back to you.
keep going.
So, and it's this notion of you lifting other people up and people lifting you up that is so great about community. So, with that in mind, how does the Adland community lift you up?
Well, I've already talked a bit about, I guess, my kind of experience over the last 6 months of just needing support from people and largely getting it. I would expand on that a little bit by saying it really, really gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling that it's a great industry to be in. So it can, it feels like hard work sometimes, and in fact, feels like hard work a lot of the time. And maybe I like hard work, but when I spoke to people I knew, they would say to me, "Oh, why don't you talk to this person because they might have some advice for you?" And I found myself having coffee, in some cases, actual coffee, actually face to face with people who are quite senior in this industry, who I'd never met before, who had never met me, who didn't know who I was, saying, "Oh, great to meet you," at 8 o'clock in the morning or over their lunch hour. And that really, really gave me a buzz and a lift. And it made me think, do you know what? There's something really wonderful here that I don't think we really talk about a lot. Um, you know, we talk a lot about the fact that we're not saving lives or that we're, not brain surgeons or,
Mm.
rocket scientists. And I think maybe we give ourselves a bit of a hard time, particularly those of us of a certain age who grew up when advertising sort of had a bit of a bad reputation as being kind of full of flashy people making loads of money. I don't really think it's like that anymore. And I think we've kind of evolved. But I think people really, really support each other in this industry. It's not, not all the time, and it's not perfect. That's why we have to raise awareness of these things. But that's the thing that kind of made me feel really assured, because I hadn't gone out to deliberately build a network, and I always think, oh, I don't see people enough, and I don't go to enough drinks, and I'm never at events, and I'm never at a round table. I can't remember the last time I was at an award ceremony. But actually, over time, you do make friends, and you do build, maybe even build your reputations together and that sort of stuff, which I definitely found while looking for a job was a helpful thing. But I think there's just this, yeah, I just think the support that actually is out there is really, really helpful. And I try not to use the word networking, because it's such an icky concept to me. I really hate the idea. I remember going to something once and they said, "And now," I think the keynote speaker stopped and they said, "And now some networking," and they
Ugh,
just
so
expected.
forced.
Oh, horrible! They just wanted us to talk to each other, and just great. I've got a name badge on, so that means I can talk to this person, a complete stranger next to me. But actually, as a concept, it's a kind of lovely one, which is that we're there helping each other out, talking to people. It's what happens whether it's at drinks or there's no drink involved. And as I said, I haven't drunk this year, and I'd quite happily go to some drinks, because actually what I want to do is chat to people and get to know people, and maybe you can help them out, maybe they can help you out. So I think that's a really, really big thing. And there's a lot of passion as well, like for the actual work we do. That's the other thing about Fast Forward, is that it was not just conceived in the idea that we're going off in different directions, but if we bring that together and really, really focus on doing great work that adds value to our client's business, ultimately, that is what we're trying to do. We can lose sight of that even. We get lost in the process of the job and the politics of whatever business we work inside. But sometimes just getting together with people and seeing how much effort goes into a pitch process, where not only are you not getting paid to deliver that pitch, someone is paying for you to be on that course. You see how much people care about it. That's kind of really refreshing and makes me feel pretty good about going in the next day.
Last question. I'm feeling so positive with this chat, by the way. It's just so
Good.
gently
Me too.
uplifting. So thank you so much for perking up my afternoon.
My
Um,
pleasure.
What's a lesson that you've learned about how to support yourself?
I may have mentioned it earlier, but I think the biggest thing I've learned recently is to try not to judge myself. So there's plenty of external stresses and strains, but it's actually the voice that I think we all maybe sometimes hear in our head saying, that's, that's too slow, that's weak, that's lazy, that's not good enough. Whilst that can be a positive thing to drive you to do better, everyone needs to, have a break. Otherwise, you just become your own worst slave master. And I would say that's the big thing I've learned, which is that whether it's of recent times when it was about not having work and blaming myself for that, which definitely I did, which may sound mad because it was completely out of my control. But I then think of I've translated that into my new job where I'm working on something, and I think, well, obviously I'm giving this everything I can give it, kind of rationally and emotionally, and then these people are giving everything they can give it, giving those people the benefit of the doubt too, and that really just kind of makes it all a bit lighter for me, which is that I'd rather start a day, do the best work I can possibly do, and then I feel like I'm ready for bed and ready to do it all again the next day, rather than thinking, oh, this is never good enough. So I think it's just getting that balance, because we're probably getting a bit deep now where these voices come from. I'm aware this is not the psychiatrist's couch, but I think that's the big thing I've learned for me personally, which is to remember to occasionally give myself a bit of a break.
Not only do you deserve a break, but I'd like you to take one right now after
Oh, thanks,
focusing
Louise.
so intently on our conversation, and giving us so many insights into managing your well-being during your career and starting a new job. It's been such an enriching and positive conversation. Thank you so much, James. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to pop a link to Fast Forward in the show notes if you want to find out more about the course. And either sign up your people if you're a team leader, or get yourself signed up if you are a team member. Then you can find all of that information there. And you can find James Appleby on LinkedIn as well. Are you happy for people to look at your profile and send you a message?
Of course.
Marvellous. Of course, he's all about, we don't call it networking, we call it connecting, making pals. He might give you a coffee with a 20-minute coffee. Oh, well, his LinkedIn's always open. James, once again, thank you so much. And thank you for listening. See you next time.